In the traditional Zen story, recorded in Case 1 of the Blue Cliff Record, Emperor Wu, a devout patron of Buddhism who funded monasteries and commissioned translations, invites the newly arrived Indian patriarch Bodhidharma to his Chinese court. Bodhidharma is believed to have lived some time between the 5th and 6th centuries of the Common Era, and is credited with spreading Chan Buddhism to China, making him the first Chinese patriarch. Little is known for sure about the life of Bodhidharma, and he persists as a semi-legendary figure. I quite like the image you see before you depicting the Indian sage. This is a famous woodblock print, and I think it really speaks to the intensity of Bodhidharma as a figure and of Zen as a practice. The image depicts Bodhidharma meditating in solitude for, according to the legendary story, no fewer than 9 years in solitude in a cave. And you can see that quiet intensity of the practice in his countenance, in his face with his semi-closed eyes and stern gaze. I was at a Zen center recently, and the Zen priest or teacher said, rightly I believe, that Zen is not about well-being or relaxation. It's a matter of life and death, as he put it. And we're going to see this coming out clearly in the story of Bodhidharma and his encounter with the emperor. So, according to the story, the Emperor Wu remarks, or I should say boasts, "I have built temples, ordained monks, and copied sutras. What merit have I earned?" Bodhidharma responds, "No merit whatsoever." Emperor Wu is taken aback. "What then is the highest principle of the holy truths?" Bodhidharma answers, "Vast emptiness, nothing holy." Emperor Wu, demanding to know who could be so insolent, "Who then is standing before me?" Bodhidharma responds, "Don't know." Bodhidharma then leaves the court and goes to the Shaolin monastery to meditate in a cave facing a wall for 9 long years. From a modern historical critical standpoint, the story is almost certainly a legend created roughly 2 centuries or so after the event supposedly took place. But whether literal or apocryphal, the story remains significant for what it shows about how Zen presents itself, how it sees itself, especially in comparison to other spiritual traditions. Indeed, from a Zen perspective, the historical truth of the story is, strictly speaking, irrelevant compared to its pedagogical function. Bodhidharma's encounter with the emperor is best understood symbolically rather than literally. The story tells us something about the essence of Zen teaching, something about, specifically, what Zen calls don't know mind, or the mind of not knowing. This is what we're going to be exploring in today's video. So welcome back to Mind Has Mountains, a podcast exploring the religious, the philosophical, and the esoteric. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And if it's your first time coming to Zen Buddhism, I would refer you to my 2 existing introductory videos on Zen. Consider for a moment the so-called big questions of life. Why is there something rather than nothing? Does God exist? Is there a self? Is there an afterlife? Why is there evil and suffering? How should I live my life? For all their differences, the various religions and philosophies of the world provide clear, articulated answers to the big questions. Some systems, for example, claim that the world exists because it was created by God, that each of us is an immortal soul, that evil and suffering result from ignorance about the nature of reality, and that the purpose of life is to return to the source of creation, God. Others disagree, questioning the very existence of God, of the soul, or of objective meaning, and so forth. Now, in contrast to such systems, the Zen approach to these questions stands out, not because it provides a different answer, but because it involves a different attitude altogether, a different approach to the questions. This attitude, I intend to show, is not a form of agnosticism or skepticism. If Zen were agnostic in response to the big questions of life, it would be neutral or unsure in response to them. If it were skeptical, it would have doubts about particular truth claims. If you are agnostic or skeptical, then in principle, on gaining more knowledge, you can in theory, or you should in theory, come to an answer. Instead, Zen challenges the very assumptions or presuppositions underlying such questions. Above all, the presupposition that there is a separate self or ego standing apart from or outside of reality, approaching it as if it were an object out there. In the Zen view, this very dualism, the apparent separation between a me inside here and a world outside there, is precisely the root of delusion and suffering. This Zen attitude will become clearer by returning to and interpreting Bodhidharma's encounter with Emperor Wu. Let's go through the dialogue again. Emperor Wu boasts, "I have built temples, ordained monks, and copied sutras. What merit have I earned?" Bodhidharma responds, "No merit whatsoever." Why does he claim that the emperor has gained no merit? A traditional understanding of Buddhism would regard the emperor's actions as highly meritorious. In performing good deeds, the emperor accumulates good karma, resulting in positive rebirth. This is standard Buddhist theory. But, Zen would insist, the emperor's very question shows him to be rooted in the delusion of duality. The emperor sees himself as a self, an actor, producing action in expectation of external or future reward. In other words, he splits up the world into subject and object, self and other, present and future, and so forth. In so doing, the emperor reveals his materialist approach to spirituality. He treats spirituality as just another material transaction whereby the ego gains rewards and avoids punishment. This reminds me of a conversation I had recently with a friend of mine. We'd spent the day exploring Buddhist temples in Chiang Mai, a town in northern Thailand. Together we observed the highly merit-based nature of Southeast Asian Buddhism, where lay people or householders perform good deeds to build merit so as to secure better future rebirths. With many religious people, my friend said, they just do good deeds to get good rewards. That's their main motivation. Now, whilst I wouldn't want to generalize and judge all lay practitioners of Southeast Asian Buddhism, I felt that my friend had a point. Many religious people, of course not just in Southeast Asia but the world over, do indeed, like Emperor Wu in the story, approach religion materialistically. Consciously or unconsciously, their actions are motivated by materialist goals. Returning to the story, were Bodhidharma to have responded to the emperor by affirming the meritorious nature of his actions, he would have effectively entrenched this very delusion. Externally, the emperor's actions do indeed appear meritorious, but from the Zen perspective, since they are motivated by a desire to gain merit, they are really just another instance of egoism. True awakening, Bodhidharma is saying, cannot be bought. What then is the highest principle of the holy truths? The emperor asks, taken aback. Vast emptiness, nothing holy. Why does Bodhidharma respond with vast emptiness and nothing holy? This seems a strange thing for a spiritual practitioner to say. Surely, isn't such a person's whole worldview oriented around the idea of the spiritual, around the idea that over and above the everyday material world, there is a higher spiritual reality? That, from the Zen perspective, is precisely the problem. It's the same problem we encountered before. The mind's habitual tendency to divide reality into this and that. In this case, the problem is setting up a duality between the sacred and the profane, between this world and a higher world. If, as Zen insists, reality is truly non-dual, then there really is just this world, this moment, here and now, before the mind, through its conceptual activity, divides it up into spiritual and material, heaven and earth. In asking what is the highest principle of the holy truths, the emperor is implicitly setting up a distinction, a duality between the sacred and the profane, again revealing his dualistic standpoint. The emperor, to be clear, isn't doing this because he's somehow a bad person. He's simply falling into what Zen regards as the conceptual traps of the mind. Such a standpoint, Zen argues, treats the world, this very present moment, as somehow inadequate or deficient. This attitude, therefore, comes at the expense of the present moment. We find such an attitude, it can be argued, across world religions. This life is a temporary test awaiting eternity in either heaven or hell, or this world is awaiting the upcoming final judgment or the coming of a savior figure, and so forth. Different claims in their own way, but from the Zen perspective of non-duality, each are different instances of the same dualistic move of separating this world from a higher spiritual realm to come. In responding, vast emptiness, nothing holy, Bodhidharma isn't saying nothing matters. That would be a nihilistic attitude. Instead, he's challenging the dualistic attitude of the emperor. Last but not least, demanding to know who could be so insolent before him, the emperor demands, who then is standing before me? And here we come to the heart of the matter. Bodhidharma famously answers, don't know. Why does he say don't know? Out of his 3 exchanges with the emperor, this is perhaps his most paradoxical response. Zen literature, of course, is full of such apparently paradoxical and iconoclastic verbal exchanges. It would be helpful, I think, to reconsider Bodhidharma's responses to the emperor's 2 earlier questions. In each case, the emperor's very question revealed his dualistic standpoint. The emperor performs meritorious deeds so as to accumulate good merit, setting up a distinction between self and action, action and reward, and so forth. Secondly, as we saw, the emperor implicitly assumes that there is a higher spiritual world in distinction to this one. From the standpoint of Zen, both are instances of the mind's habitual tendency to conceptualize, to carve up the world, as it were, into concepts. Now, when the emperor finally asks, who is standing before me? He is asking for a label, a title, or a credential. I am a Grand Master from India. Bodhidharma's don't know isn't an admission of ignorance. Rather, it is an immediate demonstration of the mind before it constructs an identity or a meta-narrative. And this is what Zen practice is really all about. The direct experience of reality, of the present moment, direct by virtue of cutting through and thereby bypassing the conceptualization of the mind. In other words, the question Zen puts to you is the same question that Bodhidharma puts to the emperor. What is the world right now before you conceptualize it, before you slap a label onto it or create a story about it? The story of Bodhidharma's encounter with the emperor highlights the meaning and significance of the don't know attitude in Zen. As we've seen, the so-called don't know mind isn't an admission of ignorance or skepticism. Rather, it's a deliberate, active stance of unlearning that sits at the very heart of the tradition. Want to experience the true nature of reality? To see the world as it really is instead of how it appears to us? Then first unlearn all your habitual tendencies of carving up reality into this and that, of creating narratives about reality instead of experiencing what's actually here and now. This attitude of unlearning is epitomized in the often quoted Zen analogy of the finger and the moon. Never mistake the finger pointing at the moon, Zen urges, for the moon itself. The finger represents words, religious scriptures, teachings, and concepts. It's useful, no doubt, because it shows you where to look, but it's not the thing itself. The moon represents direct reality, enlightenment, and truth. It is what you are actually supposed to see and experience instead of simply talk about. According to Zen, we mistake the finger for the moon each time we take our concepts or ideas about reality for reality itself. Zen isn't saying that we should jettison words and concepts altogether. It acknowledges the utility of such things. Rather, Zen is reminding us not to mistake such things for the reality they signify. Seen from this view, if we return to the emperor's exchange with Bodhidharma, we find that the emperor, for all his good deeds, isn't actually experiencing reality directly. He's spinning an elaborate story about reality. I am such and such a person, an emperor, a person of the highest rank and stature, and I am performing good deeds like building temples to accumulate good karma so that, in accordance with Buddhist teachings, I can secure a good rebirth in my journey to attaining the final goal of Buddhahood. That, Zen would say, isn't reality. That's a story which effectively distracts from the suchness of the present moment. By suchness, Zen is referring to pure experience, to the fluid and always open nature of the world before the conceptual mind steps in to divide it. To see why this attitude is so distinct, consider how Zen responds to the big questions compared to other traditions. For example, when it comes to the self, whereas Vedanta, for instance, would identify the individual self, the Atman, with universal consciousness or Brahman, Zen instead would say the self is empty of inherent fixed essence. Don't know who I am opens up immediate fluid participation in the present moment without clinging to any fixed identity. Or when it comes to the question of God, a theist would argue for the existence of a personal, transcendent creator with a plan and a moral order for the world. Zen would respond simply with silence or radical immediacy. When asked what is the Buddha, Zen masters famously answered with mundane realities such as 3 pounds of flax or the cypress tree in the courtyard. Or when it comes to the question of meaning and purpose, teleological traditions like Christianity would argue that history is ultimately moving toward a final resolution, salvation. Zen, by contrast, emphasizes suchness. Things are simply as they are, without needing an overarching teleological justification. Meaning is not found at the end of time, but in washing your bowl here and now. What we've been discussing is not just an abstract debate about the relation between language and reality. It continues to inform religious practice. In contemporary Zen, most notably popularized in the Korean school of Zen, known as Son, don't know mind, or not knowing, is cultivated as the primary method of meditation. Instead of trying, as in other schools of meditation, to suppress thoughts or attain a state of mystical trance, a Zen practitioner instead holds a specific fundamental question known as a koan. In the Korean tradition, this is typically either "What is this?" or "Who am I?" without accepting any intellectual answer that the mind offers. When an answer arises, for example, "I am a soul," or "I am the universe," or even "nothing matters," the practitioner simply applies "don't know" to that thought, returning to the open, non-conceptual awareness that precedes all language. To repeat, don't know mind isn't about ignorance or agnosticism or skepticism. It's about moving from, as it were, the conceptual mind, which grasps at experience through generating theories about experience, to direct, unmediated contact with the immediate present. Zen's resistance to grand meta-narratives rests on a key insight about human psychology. Our systems of belief are often defenses against the raw immediacy of life. Concepts, after all, more often than not settle into dogma. Once a truth is codified into a system, people begin worshipping the system rather than directly experiencing reality. Zen calls this treating the medicine as the disease. Moreover, Zen holds that the ultimate nature of existence cannot be captured by dualistic language. Any answer to a big question phrased in words is inherently incomplete. Moreover, a meta-narrative, a story that answers the big questions, provides psychological comfort by offering certainty. Zen prioritizes radical liberation over comfort, demanding that you stand naked in the mystery of existence without a conceptual safety net. Ultimately, the don't know attitude does not leave you in a vacuum of nihilism. By letting go of the need for a final totalizing explanation of existence, the world is returned to you as it actually is, vivid, ungraspable, and completely present in the simplest daily acts. But, a skeptic or critic can argue, is Zen really free of meta-narratives? Isn't Zen itself a meta-narrative? There is an argument to be made here that Zen does indeed put forward an unarticulated meta-narrative, an account or story of the nature of reality being open, free, selfless, empty, non-conceptual, and so forth. That's still a theory about reality. Postmodern philosophers famously argue that it isn't even possible or feasible to experience reality without a story. We are always already interpreting the world. There is no such thing as pure experience or the view from nowhere through which we come into contact with the real. This was, as I understand it, essentially the argument put forward by Stephen Katz in his seminal 1978 essay, Language, Epistemology, and Mysticism. Katz argued that there is no such thing as pure mystical experience. We always already approach experience with our inbuilt language and culture. In other words, to use an analogy, we can't escape seeing the world through colored lenses. Like the German philosopher Immanuel Kant before him, Katz was arguing that concepts do not just interpret an experience after it happens, concepts actively shape and construct the experience as it occurs. Hence, Katz's position is known as constructivism. Before Katz, through the influence of such figures as William James, Evelyn Underhill, and W.T. Stace, philosophy of religion was dominated by perennialism. The idea that all mystics the world over, whether Christian, Sufi, or Buddhist, essentially experience the same unmediated reality. They simply describe it using different language. This was famously argued by Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, in his book The Perennial Philosophy. Whilst perennialism remains popular among religious people today, it has largely fallen out of favor since Katz's 1978 paper. Applied to Zen specifically, Katz's argument implies that Zen's so-called unknowing is really a learned framework. A Zen practitioner sitting zazen does not enter a culturally blank slate. They bring a specific repertoire of expectations. Belief in Buddha nature, years of reading koans, monastic training, and the specific aesthetic of spontaneity. Second, the unmediated feeling is really an illusion. When a Zen master experiences a sudden breakthrough and perceives things as they are, without concepts, Katz would argue that this phenomenon of feeling unmediated is itself constructed by the very Zen conditioning that told them awakening feels unmediated. Third, Zen produces Zen experiences. Just as a Kabbalist's expectations mediate an experience of the tree of life, a Zen monk's don't know mind is a specific cognitive structure that produces a distinctly Zen state of consciousness, not an objective raw reality outside of culture. How might Zen respond to this challenge? Whilst a detailed look at the perennialist constructivist debate in the philosophy of religion would take us beyond this presentation, perhaps it could be a topic for a future video, I would note in passing that Zen is arguably not unaware of the problem. As mentioned earlier, Zen is adamant about not mistaking the finger for the moon. Whilst we employ words, concepts, and theories in everyday life, we shouldn't mistake those things for the reality they designate. In other words, Zen reminds us that we should be aware that the maps we use when approaching reality are just that, maps, not to be confused with the terrain itself. Does Zen approach reality with a map of its own? Arguably, yes. Zen itself is conditioned phenomenon insofar as it results from the encounter and interaction between Indian Buddhism and Chinese Taoism, each of which approach reality with quite particular theories and concepts. Again, I would refer you to my existing videos on Zen Buddhism. However, to be charitable to Zen, it could be argued that Zen is perhaps more aware of its status as a map, as a system of thought, than other traditions have historically been. Zen literature is full of irreverent and iconoclastic rejoinders to kill the Buddha, that is, don't become attached to any symbol or figure of authority as the final goal, no matter how sublime they may be. The Pali Canon itself expresses this through the analogy of the raft. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, compares his teachings to a raft which help us to cross the shore. On crossing the shore, we should hardly continue carrying the raft with us, but discard it. In other words, we use words, concepts, and theories, and as we've seen, Zen has ones of its own, as useful or skillful pedagogical devices. Once they serve their purpose, they should be left behind. Does this response by itself sufficiently address Katz's constructivist critique of so-called pure religious experience? Arguably not, but it does for now acknowledge the problem. So, to conclude, as humans, we raise big perennial questions about existence, questions of life, meaning, God, the self, good and evil, and so forth. We turn to religions and philosophies as systems of truth, as meta-narratives, to provide answers to these questions. We find existential comfort in these systems. But characteristically, in response to such questions, Zen famously adopts the don't know mind, or the mind of not knowing. This isn't because Zen is agnostic about these questions, or ignorant of the answer, or skeptical whether an answer is even attainable. Rather, Zen takes issue with the very attitude underlying the questions in the first place, the attitude which, from the Zen perspective, results from a dualistic mind which carves up experience, mistaking its theories about experience for experience itself. Want to know about the true nature of reality? Then have a look and see, Zen would say, at this very moment, here and now, before the mind grasps at it. We've seen that certain philosophers have argued that the pure experience that Zen speaks of may not be possible after all. Such philosophers argue that we always already approach the world through our language and culture. As I've said, whilst this does put forward a genuine challenge to Zen, I don't think Zen is unaware of the problem. Perhaps the key takeaway lesson from today's video, Zen would say, is not to take our theories and concepts of reality so seriously. Reality, Zen would say, is ever more open, fluid, and free, and perhaps stranger than our best theories and stories would ever suggest. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll see you next time.